Montana Territory, 1876. The wind howled off the Bitterroot Mountains as the sun dipped low behind the pines, casting copper light over a trail worn thin by hooves and heartbreak. Lydia Prescott kept her face turned from the road as the stagecoach rattled toward the edge of Willow Creek. She had learned long ago that strangers stared less if you stared at the floorboards. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed the right side of her face, but even in the half-light, the scars were still visible. Angry, raised. A reminder of the fire that had taken her family's home in Missouri 6 years ago, and nearly her life with it. No one had asked if she wanted to remarry after that. No one ever did, until the letter came from her cousin, a widow who ran a boarding house just outside of Willow Creek. "You come here, Lydia," the letter had said. "You got hands, you got a heart, and I got more rooms than I can clean." But her cousin had died before Lydia arrived. Now she stood alone at the edge of the property, her satchel clutched in one hand, a pair of boys watching her from the porch steps. They could not have been older than 10 and 7, dirty-cheeked, barefoot, and glaring. "You the one comin' from Missouri?" the older boy called. Lydia nodded. "I am." He stood, crossed his arms. "Ma said you'd be here sooner." "I came as quick as I could." The younger one sniffed. "Ma's gone." "Buried her last week." Lydia's heart sank. "I am sorry." The older one tilted his chin. "You still stayin'?" She looked past them at the weather-worn house, the chipped windows, the half-fallen barn, then back at the boys. "If you will let me." Somewhere behind her, a horse snorted. Lydia turned. A man had dismounted from a chestnut mare and was tying the reins to the post. Broad-shouldered, dust-covered, with a rifle strapped crosswise across his back and a weathered hat pulled low. His face was sun-dark, clean-shaven, with a scar just under one eye lighter than hers, but a scar all the same. He glanced at her, and for the first time in too many years, Lydia felt herself being seen, not just looked at, but truly seen. "You must be Lydia Prescott," he said, voice grounding deep like boots in gravel. "I am." He stepped forward, holding out a hand. "Porter Callahan. I looked in on the boys after their mama passed, helped get them through the worst of it." The older boy grumbled. "He's not our pa." Porter gave him a look. "Never said I was." Lydia took his hand. His grip was firm and warm, not lingering but not rushed either. "I figured you might need help settling in," Porter said. "Roof leaks, stove's temperamental." And he glanced back at the boys. "They ain't easy." "I can manage," Lydia said, even though her hands were shaking. "I do not doubt it," he said, tipping his hat. "But I will come back tomorrow." "If that is all right." She nodded, unsure why her chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with fear. That night, she tucked the boys into their beds after chasing the younger one down when he tried to sleep in the barn. They did not thank her. But they let her pull the quilts up to their chins, and that was enough. The next morning, Porter returned, with nails, wood, and a sack of flour. "I am not here for charity," Lydia said as he hoisted a plank up onto the roof beside her. He looked over his shoulder, one brow arched. "Good. Because I was not offering any." They worked quietly, side by side. She handed him tools. He patched shingles. Now and then he glanced at her, not at the scars, but her eyes, her hands, her mouth when she laughed softly at something the younger boy said. "You got people back in Missouri?" he asked when they paused for water. "None that want me." He studied her face for a moment, slow and careful. "Then they are fools." Lydia looked away and her throat went tight. He did not ask questions she was not ready to answer. He did not stare. He just showed up, every day, fixing the well pump, teaching the boys to whittle, bringing over a fresh loaf of bread like it was nothing. After a week, the boys had stopped scowling. The younger one, Henry, had even taken to sitting beside Lydia on the porch in the evenings, shoulder pressed against her arm. Porter says you used to read a lot, he whispered one night. I did. You still got books? Not yet. I want to learn. She looked down at him. I will teach you. The older boy, Harrison, sat on the top step. I do not need readin'. I need someone who can shoot straight. Porter, who was saddling his mare nearby, turned his head. Then come with me tomorrow, I will show you. The boy's eyes lit up, but he masked it with a shrug. Lydia saw it anyway. That night, after the boys had gone to sleep, Lydia stepped out to the porch where Porter was fixing the latch on the screen door. You do not have to keep doing this, she said. He looked up. Doing what? Helping me. He stood, wiping his hands on a rag. I am not doing it for charity. I told you that. Then why? I like the way Henry smiles when you read to him. I like how Harrison listens when you speak, even when he pretends not to. And I like the way you look at people like they matter, like they are not broken just because life cracked them down the middle. Lydia's breath caught. You barely know me. I know enough. He reached out, slow and deliberate, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed the edge of her scars. He did not flinch. You are beautiful, Lydia, he said, voice low. And I do not care what anyone else ever told you. She stood frozen, heart pounding like hooves on hard ground. No one had said that to her. Not since before the fire. Not ever like this. I should go, he said, stepping back, but she touched his wrist, just lightly. Will you stay for supper tomorrow? His eyes softened. I would like that. She nodded, and for the first time in years she felt something bloom in her chest that was not pain. She watched him ride off into the deepening dusk, and the boys slept soundly inside. And Lydia Prescott, scarred, alone, and long forgotten by the world, stood on that porch and smiled. The next morning broke soft and cold, frost clinging to the edges of the window panes while the chimney smoke curled thin into the gray light. Lydia wrapped her shawl tighter as she stepped outside, a basket on her arm, her boots crunching over the brittle grass. The hens had stopped laying regular, and she hoped the neighbor 2 miles east might still have eggs to spare. She left Harrison with a stack of kindling to split, and Henry beside a flour sack, stitching a patch with a crooked needle. Both boys had taken to the rhythm of chores without fuss, though Harrison still tested boundaries like a colt feeling for the edge of a fence. By the time she returned, the sun had climbed just enough to melt the frost from the porch rail. She paused at the gate. Porter's mare stood tied out front. Inside, he was seated at the table with Henry beside him, both bent over a wooden board where Porter traced letters with the back of a nail. Artiquette's a tricky one, he was saying. Don't let it trick you. Henry's brow creased as he sounded the letter out under his breath. Harrison sat on the far end of the bench, arms crossed, but his eyes followed every line drawn. Lydia set the basket down and hung her shawl. Porter glanced up, and his face shifted subtle, but the warmth there settled something low in her chest. I didn't expect you so early, she said, voice steady. Roof over the back porches sagging. Thought I'd see to it before the wind makes it worse. She nodded, brushing her skirts. The eggs'll go toward supper. If I can find enough wild onions. I was thinking hash. Then I'll make sure I stay long enough to earn it. Later, while Harrison helped Porter lift the beam into place, Lydia walked the creek behind the barn, her hands brushing low branches in search of anything tender still holding on through frost. She found only a few shoots, but the air was clean and the quiet wrapped her. When she returned, Harrison was scraping mud from his boots, cheeks red from effort. He says I ought to keep my feet wider when I lift, he muttered as she passed. It's good advice. He said it like I didn't know anything. She crouched beside him, her voice low. Learning things don't make you small, it means you're paying attention. He didn't answer, but he didn't storm off either. That evening, while the hash browned over the stove and the boys argued over who got to set the tin plates, Lydia stepped out onto the porch where Porter stood cleaning his hands with a rag. "I saw you teaching Henry," she said. "He's taken to you. I reckon he's hungry for someone to believe he's worth the time." She leaned against the post. "And Harrison," Porter looked toward the door. "That one's a harder stone, but he's got a good core. Just doesn't trust folks to stay." The air between them settled, quiet but full. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. "You're not. I've taken in 2 boys that aren't mine. I've got nothing saved." And my face, he turned toward her. "You think I can't see you plain?" She blinked. He stepped closer, voice low. "You're strong without being hard. You got a quiet way of holding people together. That's no burden, Lydia. That's a gift." She tried to answer, but her throat closed tight. She looked away, blinking hard. He reached out and gently took her hand, his thumb brushing the calloused edge of her fingers. "I'm not in a hurry," he said, "but I'm not walking away." Lydia stood still, her breath caught between disbelief and something aching and new. Inside, Henry called out that the hash was burning. She let Porter's hand go and turned toward the door, her voice steady. "Then we best not let it." And when they sat down at the table, all 4 of them, plates warm and the lantern casting soft light, Lydia felt something unfamiliar but steady take root in her chest. A beginning. Not hope, not yet. But the shape of it. The snow held off longer than expected that year. By late October, the fields behind the house were still bare of frost, though the air carried the sharp edge of the coming season. Lydia laid the last of the split cedar along the side of the house, brushing her palms down her apron as she stepped back to check the stack. It would hold. Probably not through February, but long enough to barter for more if need be. Porter came up the path leading a mule loaded with canvas bags and burlap satchels. Harrison opened the gate without being asked, and though he didn't speak, he walked beside the man back toward the barn. Henry trailed behind, humming tunelessly, a thin stick swinging from one hand. Lydia met Porter by the porch. "What's all that?" "Salt pork, beans, dried apples. Picked up supplies in Stevensville." He scratched his neck, glancing at the boys. "Figured you wouldn't ask, but winter's no time to run short. I didn't know you were riding that far. Didn't want to say unless I came back with what I meant to." She studied the lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his boots were crusted with road dust. "You didn't have to." He looked at her steady. "Didn't think I should wait for someone else to do it." She didn't answer. Just reached for the sack he handed her and took it inside. That evening, while the boys played a quiet game of checkers by the stove, Lydia rolled out dough for a second pie. She hadn't planned to bake 2, but she'd found dried cherries at the bottom of one of Porter's bags. She didn't ask if he'd traded something of his for them. Porter stood leaning against the window frame, arms folded, watching the flame behind the stove glass. "You ever think about leaving here?" She didn't look up from the dough. "There were days after I first arrived when I thought I'd made a mistake, but no." "Why?" She pressed the crust into the pan, smoothing the edge with her thumb. "This land doesn't ask for more than you've got. Just what you're willing to give." He nodded, quiet. "Then, you ever think about marrying again?" Her hands paused. "I'm not asking," he added quickly. "Not yet. Just wondering if you think about it at all. I used to think no one would want me. Not looking the way I do now." His eyes settled on her, but he didn't interrupt. "I've seen how folks glance away or pretend not to notice." She turned toward him. "I don't hide it anymore. But that doesn't mean I forgot how it felt. You shouldn't have to carry that alone. I'm not sure I know how not to." He stepped closer, slow and sure. "If you ever wanted something else more, I'd hope you'd know I'm not afraid of what's already healed." She met his gaze, something in her chest twisting tight. "I wouldn't know what to do with someone who stayed." "I'd show you," he said, voice low as rain against the sill. The pie cooled on the windowsill while the boys fell asleep on the rug, their game unfinished. Lydia placed a blanket over them and stood in the doorway, arms folded. Porter gathered his coat but didn't put it on. "You want me to go?" She shook her head. "There's a spare quilt in the back room." He didn't smile, just nodded once and stepped quietly down the hall. Lydia blew out the lantern, her breath catching in the dark, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone in the quiet. Lydia woke to the hush that came before snow. She lay still beneath the quilt, the faint creak of the house around her. Beyond the wall, she heard Henry turn in his sleep, the soft scrape of his foot against the straw mattress. The air inside had cooled overnight, but no wind rattled the shutters. When she stepped onto the porch just before dawn, the sky was low and white, the ground bare but waiting. Porter was already outside, rolling a tarp over the woodpile. He'd taken to rising before the boys, checking the barn or repairing odd things without being asked. She hadn't told him to stay. But he had. "Feels close," she said, pulling her shawl tighter. "Won't be long now, you've got enough put back, for a while. Not if spring comes late." He nodded, tying the tarp down. "I'll check the traps today, might still be fox along the south ridge." She glanced toward the barn. "Take Harrison with you. He's been watching your hands when you skin rabbits. I think he wants to ask, but won't." Porter looked toward the house. "You sure he listens to you?" He didn't answer that, just nodded once, then stepped aside to let her pass. By the time the sun climbed above the trees, Porter and Harrison had left on horseback. Henry sat at the table, his chin in his hand, a slate in front of him. "I can't get the E right," he muttered. "Draw it like a ladder," Lydia said, setting a mug of warm milk beside him. "3 rungs." He tried again, tongue caught between his teeth. Outside, the day wore on gray and still. Lydia mended what she could, folded linens, soaked beans. She kept glancing at the window, but the snow didn't start. When Porter and Harrison returned near dusk, the boys' cheeks were streaked with wind and pride. "I helped skin 2 hares," he said, holding out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "Didn't even gag." Lydia raised an eyebrow. "That's a high bar." Porter stepped down from the saddle. "He's got steady hands. Could learn trapping if he wants it." Harrison tried to hide the grin twisting at the edge of his mouth. While she cleaned the hares, Porter split kindling and the boys dragged in armfuls of pine cones. By nightfall, the house smelled of wood smoke and thyme. Lydia ladled stew while the boys sat cross-legged on the floor, trading stories about the trail. Harrison's voice had softened, less guarded. Later, after the boys drifted off under the quilt Porter had brought in from the barn, Lydia lifted the kettle from the stove and poured 2 cups. They sat across from each other at the table, hands wrapped around the warm tin. "You taught him something today," she said, not looking at him. "I didn't do much." "You gave him a reason to try. That's more than most folks ever do." Porter leaned back, the chair creaking softly. "I didn't know if I had it in me to raise someone else's boys. You're not raising them alone." He looked at her, long and quiet. "You think we could do it, all of us together?" Lydia didn't answer right away. She watched the way the firelight caught the line of his jaw, the wear in his collar, the scar under his eye. He didn't flinch when she met his gaze. "I think," she said slowly, "that I don't feel like I'm waiting for something to break anymore." He reached across and laid his hand over hers. His palm was rough, warm. She didn't pull away. "I want to build something that lasts," he said. "With you, with them." Her throat tightened. "I never thought I'd have that again." "You do now," he said, "if you want it." The snow began just before dawn, soft, silent, steady as breath. The snow deepened in the weeks that followed, blanketing the hills until fences vanished and creek beds turned to silence. Lydia learned to judge the cold by the sound the floorboards made at dawn. Porter built a windbreak near the barn out of scrap wood and dragged evergreen boughs to line the coop walls. Harrison took to trapping with a quiet determination, and Henry spent hours at the kitchen table, copying out lines Lydia had written by hand. One morning, after a night thick with sleet, Lydia found Porter in the lean-to sharpening a draw knife. She stood in the doorway, watching the steady pace of his hands. "You planning a project?" she asked. He wiped the blade clean on his sleeve. "The boys need better beds." "Thought I'd build frames come spring, something off the floor." She stepped inside, drawing the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "They'd like that." He set the knife aside and looked at her. "I've been thinking about that room behind the kitchen." "What about it?" "It's big enough for two. Could add a second window come thaw, maybe a proper stove." She leaned against the post, her fingers curled around the edge of her sleeve. "You're not talking about the boys." "No," he said, "I'm not." She didn't speak right away. The wind hissed past the cracks in the wall behind her, but the warmth between them held. "I've never shared a room with a man," she said at last. "Not since before the fire." Porter stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "I don't want to take anything from you. Not space, not peace. I know that." His hand brushed her sleeve, not quite touching. "I want to marry you, Lydia, when the ground softens and we can ride to town. I want to stand beside you in front of whoever you choose and call you wife." Her breath caught. "You're sure?" "I've been sure a long while. I just didn't want to ask until I knew how you felt." She looked at his eyes, clear, steady, the color of river stone, and nodded. "Then yes." He reached for her hand, and this time she let his fingers close around hers. They stood like that for a while, the smell of cedar and snow between them. That night, over a supper of beans and cornbread, Lydia told the boys. "You'll marry him?" Henry asked, wide-eyed. "I will." "Does that mean we have to call him Pa?" Harrison asked, not quite looking up. Porter set his cup down. "You call me what you're comfortable with. Doesn't change how I show up." Harrison nodded slowly. "All right." They married in late March under a sky washed clean by the melt. Porter borrowed a wagon and drove them to the chapel outside Stevensville, where a circuit preacher offered the service without fuss. Lydia wore a dress she'd sewn herself, pale blue with narrow cuffs, her hair pinned back with a single comb. There were no guests besides the boys, no music, no flowers, just hands joined and vows spoken plain. When they returned, snow still clung in patches to the shadows, but the earth had begun to soften. Porter moved his tools to the back of the barn to make space for the new bed frame. Lydia cleared the small room off the kitchen and stitched new curtains from flour sacks. Harrison helped dig post holes for a second clothesline, and Henry planted onion seeds in neat rows. Late one evening, after the house had quieted and the fire burned low, Lydia sat beside Porter on the porch bench he'd built the previous spring. Her head rested against his shoulder, the wool of his shirt warm beneath her cheek. "I used to think I'd never have anything steady again," she said, voice low. "You do now." She turned her face toward him. "And you?" "I never trusted the quiet before," he said. "Now I don't want to live without it." She kissed him then, slow and full, the kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything but gave everything back. Years passed. The boys grew. Harrison taller than Porter by 20, with a sharp eye and a steadier hand. Henry soft-voiced and clever, always with a book tucked under his arm. They called Porter Pa in time, though neither could say exactly when they started. Lydia taught children from nearby farms to read in the front room during winters, and in summers, she tended a garden that stretched along the fence line. They built a second room onto the house the following year, and Porter carved their initials into the beam above the door. He never missed supper, and she never stopped reaching for his hand when the day grew long. And every spring, when the snow melted and the fields turned green, Lydia walked out to the edge of the property with Porter beside her, their fingers twined, the past behind them like a long, quiet road. They didn't speak of the fire anymore. They didn't need to. They had built something stronger, something that held.